Welcome to this LSRI lecture on Indigenous approaches to nature by our inaugural Integral Ecology Visiting Fellow, Dr. Vijay D'Souza. My name is Séverine Denelin, and I am the Director of International Development at the Laudato Si Research Institute. The aim of the Integral Ecology Visiting Fellowship is to host scholars from the majority world for one term to conduct transdisciplinary research on a contemporary ecological challenge, drawing wisdom from theological and indigenous traditions. And the fellowship is also a partnership with the Scholar Institution. It is a great pleasure at the LSRI that Vijay D'Souza has accepted to be our first Integral Ecology Visiting Fellow. Vijay did an MPhil and DPhil at Oxford in linguistics, and he was at Campion Hall. He has been working for more than 25 years with the Russo Aka people of Arunachal Pradesh in northeastern India. His expertise includes phonology, language documentation, language description, and the revival of endangered languages and cultures. Vijay's work with the Russo Aka has seen the development of an orthography, a successful revival of the language, and the printing of the first books in Russo Aka. Vijay is the founding director of the Northeastern Institute of Language and Culture, NEILAC, in Guwahati, in Northeast India. NEILAC seeks to empower indigenous communities to retain, reclaim, and reshape their linguistic and cultural heritage. Vijay is also a Jesuit priest, and he is attached to the Kohima region of the Karnataka province. Tonight, he will share with us some of his insights of his works with indigenous communities and the Russo Aka, and how and why preserving their languages is central to maintaining the ecological balance of our common home. So Vijay, over to you.
Thank you, Severin. This lecture is a continuation of a reflection LSRI and NEILAC started together a couple of years ago. In 2022, we jointly organized a transdisciplinary dialogue series reflecting on the themes of language endangerment and poverty and policy, ethics, and identity. In September 2024, recently, we once again organized a conference on language, ecology, and culture, and in this lecture, I continue this conversation and reflection. Trigger warning, there will be stories of violence, animal sacrifice, and natural calamities in my lecture today. I would like to very gratefully acknowledge the Aka Russo community of Arunachal Pradesh, who for the last 25 years have accepted me into their community and taught me their language and culture. What I have learned is only a small part of their rich cultural heritage. I hope soon more members of the community will come forward to tell their own story. Prelude. Before I start, I invite the audience to keep these statements in mind. A set of beliefs that have resulted from my academic work as well as from my association with the Aka community. First, biological diversity and linguistic cultural diversity are interconnected. We sometimes refer to this as biocultural diversity. Second, environmental degradation and the loss of indigenous languages and cultures are linked. And third, indigenous peoples, their languages and cultures are key to addressing the global ecological crisis. And with these three statements, I would like to explore with you the indigenous approaches to nature. I start with two observations I had made in the September conference. The first, On the ecological front, we have made in the last 3 decades, we as in humanity, tremendous progress, tremendous scientific progress, whether it's in climate science, ecosystem restoration, at least the theoretical part of it, um, uh, ecology and technology and so many things. Yet, we are witnessing accelerating global ecological crisis. On the language and cultural front, there has been tremendous progress in the field of language documentation and reclamation since the 1990s. I myself have been involved in language documentation and revitalization efforts. We have made progress in terms of tools and techniques, theorization and practice of language documentation. Yet, there is a humbling fact. Despite all the achievements of several documentary, descriptive, and scientific goals, after millions of dollars and countless hours of effort and so many documentary corpora, theses, and articles, the languages are still hurtling towards endangerment and extinction. Minoritized, and indigenous languages are still being pushed to the brink. So the question, why, despite the scientific and technological progress, there is continuing of endangerment of indigenous languages and cultures on the one hand, and unabated ecological crisis on the other. So, could a possible answer be that the problems are misdiagnosed and therefore the solutions don't work? This seems to be the case, as it has been pointed out by people listed here. First of all, Pope Francis in his encyclical Laudato Si points to the failure of technocratic solutions to a human problem. There is this nature culture, human, non-human binaries pointed out by Latour. Conservation minus humans, removing indigenous people from conservation areas, as pointed out by Indian anthropologist Ambika Ayadurai, and conservation minus political solutions. On the language and cultural endangerment side, again, there are technological and pedagogical solutions to a political problem. Political processes of linguistic and cultural oppression, there's not much reflection on this. Language endangerment and human rights, linguistic human rights, there has been some reflection on this, but perhaps not sufficient, and not a central conversation when we talk about language endangerment or cultural endangerment. There are colonial extractive approaches to indigenous languages and cultures, treating languages as just data for our work and refusing to ask the question, what is in it for the communities? Language as merely a scientific object. I'm not denying that there is this aspect in our studies as linguists, but merely as a scientific object rather than a human and socio-cultural phenomenon. Keeping these issues in mind, in this lecture, I reflect on whether indigenous peoples and their ways of life can show us the way forward. Various organizations and networks today, many of them run by indigenous people themselves, have drawn world's attention to the connection between indigenous people and ecology. Indigenous movements emphasize a deep cultural link to nature. Political, media, and academic groups were sympathetic to this cause, highlight this link as an important lesson for the rest of humanity. And indigenous knowledge is key to promoting sustainable practices. Engaging with indigenous culture inspires pro-environmental attitudes. However, there have been questions about these assertions and beliefs. Milton, for example, anthropologist here will be familiar with this. So she criticizes some of the approaches and actually questions this. Do non-industrial societies, when she says non-industrial societies, if you see the book, the examples that she gives are all indigenous societies. So I will use indigenous societies as a sort of synonymous to this. Non-industrial societies, do they have special ecological wisdom which the industrial societies have lost? So is there a primitive ecological wisdom? So she says this aligns with the romanticized noble savage and idealization of natural world that has shaped many of the values of central to environmentalism. She calls it a myth in the sense that it is an unquestionable, unquestioned dogmatic belief within environmental discourse today. And it is also intrinsic to the radical critique of industrialism. Why? Because without the contrast provided by the idealized non-industrial societies, indigenous societies living in ecological harmony, the central argument that industrialism derives environmental destruction would lack its foundational premise. So it seems to be a convenient argument to hold. Also, some indigenous societies may live their lives in ways that are environmentally sound, but ecological balance where it exists is an incidental consequence of human activities and other factors rather than being an ideal or a goal that is actively pursued. This is Milton's assertion. We will see whether the discussion today about us, Uso community bears this out or no. So if this is true, she says, it could be a highly significant, if rather pessimistic, contribution to environmental discourse, because environmentalists look to non-industrialized peoples not only for models of ecologically sound practice, but also for appropriate ways of thinking about the environment. But in fact, if no appropriate ways of thinking exist in the human cultural repertoire, if non-industrial peoples are prevented from destroying the environment, not by their ideologies, but by conditions beyond their control, many indigenous communities, she says, simply do not have the tools to destroy nature. Given the tools, they would go about destroying it anyway, perhaps. So then the reality facing the environmentalist cause looks considerably less favorable. So again, with this, let's move on to the next section of my talk today. This lecture, henceforth, I will divide into 3 parts, and I label them as this: story selling, storytelling, and story building. So coming to story selling, from the picture, I think it's quite clear what story selling is. Story selling as a neo-colonial and neo-colonial project. So a story is erased, a new story is told. To conquer the land, its guardians must be subdued, if not by the sword, then by narratives imposed. So it is an act of erasing the stories, mythologies, belief systems of indigenous peoples and replacing it with some other story. We all live by our stories. Human communities cannot exist without stories which give them meaning. So if one set of stories is not convenient to the colonizer, and those stories will be erased and a new convenient story will be imposed, and that's been the process, the colonial process, for centuries. Just one example. I've deliberately not put the reference and the date. Let us see if we can guess. They fill up, I'm just quoting as it is. So they fill up their stomachs only with forest products and cover their bodies with leaves of the plants. There are 13 primitive tribes in Orissa also. They sleep on the branches of the tree. They are known as monkeydea, monkeys. There are so many varieties of primitive tribes, they don't understand anything. Okay, which century could it be? This is 2020. So we may think these, humanity is past these beliefs and this kind of views about indigenous communities, but these are still very alive and active in our societies. So story selling is telling indigenous people and inculcating in them beliefs that they are primitive, unscientific, superstitious, backward, illiterate, and ignorant. These are the words that we hear even today. So if ecological degradation is colonizing the land, language and cultural endangerment is a result of colonizing the mind. So therefore, colonial process of when indigenous people are colonized, languages, cultures, and land are colonized together. It involves erasure, epistemic injustice, coercion, violence, and violation of rights. So the first way of story selling is by denigration, and second way of story selling is romanticization. That is what perhaps Milton was reacting against. Romanticization of indigenous peoples, their cultures and languages and landscapes. The idea of the innocent noble savage, idyllic, beautiful, benign landscapes. Again, romanticization is not only about the people, also about their landscapes. I wonder whether ecotourism of today is not inspired by this kind of romanticization. And there's supposed to be perfect harmony between nature and humans in these spaces. A few reflections about romanticization is a projection of the weird ideals, this Western education, industrialized, rich, and democratic ideals of nature onto indigenous people. Perhaps assuaging colonial guilt, because now indigenous people have been suppressed for so long. Now we must somehow make them innocent and they can do no wrong at all. It is also political expediency and identity building by the indigenous communities themselves. So romanticization can happen from without, also from within. Next part is storytelling. In this part, I will bring some stories and reflections from the Oso culture. So first, let us set the context for this reflection. So these are some facts about indigenous people. We call them tribal people. I know in the West, tribal is not a very good word, but in India, indigenous people is very much a contested term, and they are officially identified as tribal people, and then they self-identify as the tribal people. So there are about 104 million, 8.6% of the Indian population, highest population for any single country of indigenous people. About 700 distinct groups with great linguistic, ethnic, and cultural diversity. These are some of the photos of indigenous people of India. These are indigenous lands. The pink ones are what is called the 5th Schedule Area District, and the green 6th Schedule Area Districts. So if the areas come under 5th and 6th Schedule, there are certain schedule of the Constitution of India, there are certain protections. They have, okay, I'll just, okay. For today, we are talking about this area of India. This is called Northeast India. There are more than 200 languages and cultures here in this area. And this is the UNESCO Atlas of Endangered Languages. And you can see how many endangered languages exist in that small area. So welcome to Arunachal Pradesh, one of the states in Northeast. and we will be going directly here where the Aka Oso people live. These are some of the glimpses, photos of Oso people. So I said this section is storytelling, and here is the story. So journey into the Aka area itself is a metaphor. So you will see landscapes of this nature as the roads snake through the mountains. Nature looks serene, mighty, soothing, calm. You can see here. And here is the human activity. Now, I am not condemning it for spoiling the beauty of nature, but this is the situation. A newly cut road there, cutting right across the mountains. And here you begin to see, as you travel on these roads, the dangers and the might of nature. Landslides, which one frequently encounters, and this kind of roads, if you look to your side, you will feel dizzy because it's sometimes 1,000 feet drop, and you'll also see strewn parts of trucks and cars never retrieved, and monuments practically every 3 or 4 kilometers or so of those who have died in road accidents. So nature is calm, serene, and inviting, at the same time mighty, unpredictable. It can throw you, hurl you down the mountains. And this is how perhaps the Oso also experience their nature. So I now invite my esteemed audience to journey with me into the Aka universe. For those who are scientifically inclined, and I presume most of us are, with our cosmology of Big Bang and trillions of galaxies, what we are going to do now is not embarking on an evaluation of how the Aka worldview stands against the modern scientific knowledge, but entering into a highly symbolic meaning-making system. It would be helpful to remember Bruno Latour's plurality of the modes of truth, equally valid without contradicting one another and without impinging on one another. We are entering into a domain of mythological truth, a symbolized system of communication used by indigenous peoples throughout the world. My sources are these. It's not possible to understand the depth and the breadth of a culture just by studying mythology or just language. It needs a multi-pronged approach. For today's presentation, I bring in examples from mythology, linguistics, and rites and rituals, and conversations. For the Oso, nature is not something that they visit as tourists or encounter during their morning walks. They, as you can see in this photograph of the Aka village here, they are surrounded by it all the time. The Aka see two natural entities as always surrounding them, watching them and watching over them, listening to their every conversation and participating in their daily lives. These are the sky, whom they call Nyedzau, Father Sky, and the earth, whom they address as No Any, which is Mother Earth. These two are together called Nyedzuno, Sky Earth, which is sometimes thought to be their highest deity. In fact, these two entities find frequent mentions in their daily discourse. For example, the Hujudawe Nyedzuno Hujoso, that is, don't be sad, Sky Earth will watch over you. The Akas believe that the sky and earth are in eternal state of embrace because they are their husband and wife. The husband being smaller than the wife, the earth, which is unusual in mythologies. The latter squeezes herself to fit, and that's why there are so many folds on her body, which are actually the mountains on which the Aka people live. Mother Earth gives shelter to all earthly life and all peoples. Each human community has its rightful place. Wusono, that is Wuso land, situated in the West Kameng district of Arunachal Pradesh, is the rightful place of the Aka people. The Aka society is organized into clans, which are basic units of socio-political organization. Clans are permanently and irrevocably attached to their land. For example, this is the village of Sakrin, seen in this picture, and anybody from Sakrin is permanently, for no matter how many generations, even 10, 15 generations, will always be attached to this land. Wherever that person lives, we can always, their children or grandchildren can always come back to this land, and they will have equal rights. So they practice slash and burn cultivation, as you can see, and surrounding forest gives them sustenance. So the land, the natural entities are ever present and sentient. You can see this is the beginning of a mythological narration. If we could please observe the old man here who narrates, who starts, and read the subtitles. I will say a word later. So in the beginning, he is addressing the sky and the earth, the mountains and spirits of mountains and rivers, and the deities who take care of them, to keep listening to him. And he is addressing the sacred myth to not only to the person in front, but also to these entities. So the nature around them is always present to the Uso people. They're always there. I just made this point. So how do they conceive their universe? I would like to briefly narrate 2 or 3 myths now, and then draw a reflection from them. One of the foundational myths of the Uso people is the story of Sixilievo and Tolievo. So this is how the story goes. It's a very long story, but I'll just cut it short to about 1 or 2 minutes. In the beginning, there were realms, and the human realm was Sijibronolu, and the spirit realm was Shapumnolu. And the spirit, who was cunning, he wanted to grab the land from humans, and he married his daughter off to the man who was very innocent and dumb. So he thought, spirit being spirit, she will kill the husband, and then somehow he can grab the land. But that didn't happen. The wife fell in love with the husband, and sensed that the father was up to some mischief. Then she started advising him. So the spirit devised various contests. One of the contests was, okay, let us go and shake the trees and see which tree shakes more. The spirit knows that since the spirit is stronger, he can win the contest. But the wife advises the husband, saying, do not just shake a tree, look for, so there is a certain type of creeper which is very strong and covers 3 or 4 trees together. You hold that creeper and shake, and then you can win the contest. And that's what happened. The man won the contest. So series of contests like this, and then finally, because of the wife's advice, and finally the human being, the man, wins every contest. But then the spirit finally says, okay, you have won, I have lost, let's go fishing as father-in-law and son-in-law. So while fishing, he tricks the son-in-law, saying, you see there is too much of glare here, you leave your eyelashes here on this stone, and you go downstream, and I will fish here. And the son-in-law, being dumb and not, the wife is not there to advise him, he keeps the eyelashes on the stone, and he goes downstream. And meanwhile, the spirit eats up the eyelashes, and the man is immediately sick. Note the connection between loss of bodily integrity, removing the eyelashes, and somebody eating them up, and then sickness. This is how frequently Akas conceive sickness, loss of your bodily integrity. And then there's a whole series of calamities that befalls the family, man and the wife. And finally, she is desperate, and then she contacts a big priest, Nyagalama and Pogalama, two of them. And finally, the matter is resolved. But while resolving, all the rules about the sacrifice and wild animals and domestic animals, and the rules about hunting, and all these rules are made while resolving this whole unfortunate situation. And finally, the story has a happy ending. So again, coming back to this, our own scientific, scientific worldview, how can somebody remove the eyelashes, keep it on a stone, and spirit eating it, and all that seems so implausible, impossible, and incoherent. But I will come to this point a bit later. Please bear with me. This is a foundational myth, because it's a very long story with lots of side stories. But what does this story teach to the Akas? This story reveals the whole philosophy of realms. So this is how they conceive the cosmos. There is the household is the core realm, and then there's a village, and there is the earth, and there are realms of Hudapuda, water and mountains, Shapumnalu, the spirit realm, the Chigjinips, the realm of the dead, and Simbye, the forest, and Nyedz, realm of the cursed souls. Not only this, there is frequent interaction between these two realms. Beings from one realm cross over to the another realm very frequently. For example, humans go to the forest, Simbye realm, for hunting, and so on and so forth. This is the whole philosophical system of realms that underlies their belief system. The inner circle is this. There is the self, and there is Nyetro, the household, where husband, wife, and children form the first circle, and then the domestic animals form the second circle. And then there is the Nyetro, etc. Each realm has a guardian. And this is, the guardian concept is, the word for that is Ibro. Ibro is not only a guardian, it's an owner, steward, guardian with roles and responsibilities that are peculiar to them. Now, it is not absolute ownership, it also comes with a set of responsibilities. The personhood. In the Western philosophy, we talk about body and soul, but also concept of personhood is much more complicated. There's body and there's soul. There are three essences, M, N, and L. I'll explain this in a moment. And there are energies which animate this body and soul and these three essences. There are Ragra, Kranse. For example, if I'm now fumbling or nervous while I'm speaking, which I'm a little bit, then the Akas will say, your Ragra has become weak, or it has become ripened, it's soft. So you need to strengthen your gagra. So these kind of energies, gagra, kranse, agze, and fuskavya, etc. Fuskavya is, for example, the hunting energy, and so on. For lack of time, I will not explain this entire complicated table, but being a linguist, I had no other way than putting this here. Sorry, that's not the real reason, to demonstrate how complex these systems are. So this is the whole system of the three essences, and there is no way of accessing these three essences except through the language and a deep analysis of morphology and phonology of the language. So only mythology or the folk tales and folk stories do not reveal this, and the Huso persons themselves, even the elders, do not directly have a way of explaining this. It's only through the language. So M is a life essence that animates your life. So Mukhya is one whose life essence is mature. Mullo is one who carries your life essence, that is your air. And Muhu is man, one whose life essence is strong. And Mimi is one whose life essence is fire. And Mukro is one whose life essence is dry, old man. And Munyo is one whose life essence is full, that is an elder in the community. Then N is body essence. I will not read everything there. Just Nishu is, when you eat chili pepper, you feel hot, that is Nishu. And when you feel cold in winter, it's Ningu. And my bodily essence is cold, or my bodily essence is hot. So this is the way of speaking. These are the real words in the language. Then L is the seat of emotions. When I say I am happy, my heart or my viscera is warm. That is the only way to say I'm happy. Or I can say I'm feeling merry, in a merry mood. That is my life, my seat of emotions has bloomed like a flower. So this is how this is the compositionality of a person, and a human person through this complex compositionality is in touch with nature. And for example, when a spirit affects you, it can affect your gagra, it can affect your hulo, the soul, it can affect your body, usso, and so on. And the word for household is sumurli. Mu is that life essence. So S is blood, M is life essence, Rli is a converging place where the entire family's life essence and blood is converged. That is the way to speak of a household. So if I say, like in a formal language, if I say I would like to visit you, I say I would like to visit your sumurli. So that is, I would like to visit a place where your family's blood and life essence are gathered. The second story is a story of kinship, tiger, our brother. Tiger, our brother. Aka see tigers as their brothers. I'm sorry, no time to explain this story, but I'll proceed. An orchid is their sister. Mithun is a bison, semi-domesticated bison is again their sister. Orchid is very important for the agricultural cycle. Only when the orchids bloom, they go to sow their seeds, and the belief is that our sister will indicate when we have to sow our seeds. Mithun, this is the most important sacrificial animal. The belief is that she sacrificed herself to cure her father. There's a legend, there is a story behind it. So each time a Mithun is sacrificed in festivals and their rituals, this story is recalled, and the kinship is very gratefully and very emotionally remembered. A small analysis of sacrifices and their relationship with the spirits. So sacrifices in, sometimes there is simplistic understanding of sacrifices in indigenous societies, sacrifices to propitiate spirits and all that. So it is not only that. Sacrifices can be transactional. So it is, I give you a sacrifice and in return I hunt animals from your forest, for example, transactional. Reparatory, okay, I took this animal from the particular governing spirit of the mountain, therefore once a year I repair the damage I have caused you by taking your animal. Propitiatory, Hudapuda, who is propitiatory, you are the deity looking after us, so every year we sacrifice an animal to you to please you also in thanksgiving. Also, relationship with their nature is symbolized in their relationship with the spirits. And from the legend, from the mythology that I just narrated earlier, we come to know that there are no neat good and bad binaries among the spirits. Governing abros with specific roles and responsibilities are in charge of their various domains. They are invisible, constant listeners and observers. They are tricksters and deceivers as well. They are unpredictable and capricious. They represent nature's inescapable presence all around us. So therefore, dealing with spirits is also, there are ways of dealing with the spirits by, when this is a picture of a shaman, also shaman. So sometimes they are just chanting and conversing with the spirits, entreating and cajoling them. All right, this person is sick, why don't you just stop troubling him, I will give you a chicken or something. Sometimes they request advice and counsel and oracles. And sometimes you need to show your domination and threaten the spirits and display your strength. How do you display your strength? There are symbols to display a shaman's strength when he enters the spirit world. Sometimes there is argumentation, negotiation and bargaining with the spirit. Oh, the spirit is asking for a cow. No, we can't afford that. We will give you only a pig this time. So this kind of bargaining goes on. And there is requesting favors from the spirits. So I just mentioned display of strength, and there is a special language. For example, when you go for hunting, you do not use the ordinary language because the spirits need to be kept in the dark. You need to speak in the forest in a language that spirits don't understand. And there is always adequate preparation that is required for entering in the spirit world. This is a symbol full of tiger teeth. Whenever any dangerous worship ceremony has to be performed, this is a compulsory addition to the shaman's dress. Spirits are treated with respect, reverence, affection, suspicion, and fear, and sometimes even hatred. So just two examples to illustrate what happens when the newborn child is born. Whoever hears the child's first cry has to call out a name and give a name to the child immediately. Because naming is an act of claiming. If you delay, the spirits will name the child and take away, and they will claim the child. So the whole philosophy of I belong, therefore I am. In hunting, for example, you are entering the spirit. In hunting, you are entering the spirit realm, and there are special taboos for hunting, and there is a special language, as I mentioned, and precautions while bringing the game back. There is a series of rituals you need to perform while bringing the game back. These two examples were to illustrate how spirits are viewed with suspicion, and you would like to keep them at a distance. I would like to summarize this section. So nature is a caring, nurturing, and sentient entity. There are realms and ownerships and governing spirit, and there is interaction between realms. The nature is volitional and has agency and is active. The land is absolute inalienable basis of their identity, and nature is a source of sustenance and protection, and they are related to natural entities, animals, and plants, and etc. So another facet of this relationship is justice and equity. Cosmos belongs to all. Humans have no privilege outside their own realm. Spirits must be repaid for favors received. Respecting other beings' rights leads to well-being and cosmic balance. Nature in Aka worldview as a capricious and fearsome entity. Humans in constant tussle with other beings. This is also very much real, not only a very nice idea of nature. Therefore, constant vigilance against capricious, treacherous beings is necessary. Nature as unpredictable and can cause harm, and nature is to be feared again. So, I will conclude with this section, that is story building. A young Arunachali once told me, our stories lack logic and reason. It is as though someone was on drugs and blabbered incoherently. Our elders thought they were important, and they keep repeating these stories these days. As more and more people get educated in the community, this seems to be the attitude, to discard all these stories and symbolic tales and replace them with modern scientific beliefs. So mythological truth is symbolic and abstract. It's often camouflaged in mythological narratives and communicated and passed through only myths. It's encoded in language, rituals, and daily practices, as we saw. Mythological system, however, is a mixed bag. It contains primordial instinctive truths versus oppressive discriminatory elements. They need evaluation and recalibration and retelling. And this has to happen through community internal processes. In indigenous languages, through their cultural and epistemic categories, not through imposed epistemic categories. So coming back to this question, has the Aka worldview prevented environmental degradation, as Milton might have suggested? There is mixed evidence. There are dams in the area, there are highways, there are timber export, constant sound of the chainsaw, people cutting trees, and depletion of fauna. But the real evidence is this. So although there is these attitudes of environmental destruction are creeping into the community, the forests are still standing around the village. So therefore, there must be definitely something in that culture. So to return to the original question again, do indigenous people have something to offer us in the time of ecological crisis? In answering Milton's question as to whether their eco-friendly ways of life is incidental to their current circumstances, I hope I have sufficiently demonstrated that the Aka worldview bases human existence within the framework of an interrelated, interdependent cosmos. This it achieves through a complex meaning system developed through centuries, through mythology, language, rituals, and daily practices. We just saw that the Akas do not just idealize or idolize nature, benefiting from its bounty every day. They share a warm, reverential affection towards it. Confronted with its immense power and ability to cause harm and destruction, they see it also as vengeful, unpredictable, fearsome entity. They see the cosmic system of law as just and equitable, where each being has its realm, rights, and privileges of abrowship. We also saw that sustainable living is a mixed bag among the Akas. However, the question is whether the destructive tendencies that are creeping into their villages is a result of a story selling. In this case, the story of a capitalistic development model, which puts ecological concerns and development in direct opposition to their culture. The standing forest throughout the Aka area, their fierce opposition to any encroachment of their land, their feeling of kinship to orchids, mithuns, and tigers, which are very real, they are all testimonies to their connection to the environment around them. As the Akas or any indigenous people get more and more educated, they struggle with the scientific categories and Western epistemologies which are seen as incompatible to their own. The clarion call is often to move on from their worldviews into modernity. But the need is to move, not to move on, but to move in, to build a new story based on their own heritage. Unfortunately, due to their either denigration or romanticization, this process is rare in today's scholarship, also among the indigenous people themselves. Notions of sentient nature and cosmic kinship and fearsome nature may be absurd to some and tantalizing to others from the outside. But for the indigenous people like Rousseau, they are inextricable from their meaning system and their identity. So what can we learn from indigenous people is perhaps a wrong question to ask. Could we pose the question differently? When story selling is stopped, when a more respectful story sharing happens between the indigenous and the industrial worlds, and when indigenous people have built their own new stories, what can they teach us about nature? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vijay, for this fascinating entry into their lives and cosmovisions, and not what we can learn from them, but respecting their own voice and agency and build the future together. Questions? I have my own, but I will save it for later. So we take 2 questions from the floor and then 1 question from the online audience. We have about 10 minutes and maybe we can have another round. Yes?
Thank you so much for that wonderful talk. I really appreciate the knowledge of the indigenous languages. And I've been wondering, I know you have spoken about how they may contribute to our own knowledge set. I know that, for example, at the American Academy in the United States, they formed a recent commission on climate change, in which it included not only scientists and scholars, but also indigenous voices who were trying to interpret some of their local, as you say, the myth and folkloric practices. And I'm wondering if in your country you see any possibility of that happening in terms of, especially with your knowledge of the language, or if others who speak the language are able to interpret some of those concepts into something that could become a part of global conversations about climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. Just another one?
Thank you. Yes, I have a similar question, because recently I was privileged to welcome an individual from an indigenous tribe in Colombia, and they've made some connections with the University of Wales at St. David's, and they are sort of looking at their own cultures now, which have been cut off from the outside world for many, many years, well, for hundreds of years. So it is a pretty intact pre-Columbian culture. But they are thinking we must re-look at our rituals and how we bring up our children and everything that we do, because we must speak to people in the outside world and convey some of what we understand. So they're working now with ecologists to look at how land can be regenerated that has been degraded. So I guess I also would have the same question as the lady before. Are there activities like that in your country?
Just one question from the audience, from the online audience, Tim.
So we have some 15 or 20 questions, but one selected is a somewhat practical and functional question as to how these stories are being collected, recorded, documented, and if this is your work or the work of a larger team, etc.?
Thank you for the questions. About the possibilities of reflecting collectively on climate change and networking with other people. I think in India the initiatives are just starting, and the consciousness about the environmental damage and the rights of indigenous people. These conversations are sometimes they happen in among the indigenous communities. As you can see, there are so many different types, different groups of indigenous people in India. So I think indigenous people in India, they themselves are sort of struggling to have a conversation and find commonalities among them because of the differences that the diversity that exists. But I think in Latin America the conversation has gone far ahead, and perhaps communities from India could learn from these conversations. About the question on language documentation, yeah, about the Uso language, we have been doing the language documentation and language revitalization work for quite a number of years now, and of course it is I am privileged to lead the team, but it's a whole team that is involved in this effort, especially the Aka Language Academy. Some of them are online and listening to this.
Have time for 2 more questions. Yes, and then Dido. Sorry, we wait for the microphone.
Thank you so much for this fascinating talk. I wanted to ask how much the political situation, both on a state level and a national level, influences the storytelling and kind of cultural shifts that you've seen, especially because I've had the privilege of spending some time in Bhutan, which is of course just next door, and where on a policy level there's a huge emphasis on keeping the culture alive and also on conservation, which is quite successful, although it's also under pressure. But in that case, it does feel as though the political level has had a very strong impact. So I'd like to hear more about what the situation looks like in Arunachal Pradesh.
I have a question in regards to the first part of your presentation about the story selling and how it connects to the storytelling, right? So I would like to know which methodologies or methods did you use to, for example, overcome the story selling part, right? Which tries to romanticize this kind of indigenous philosophies, right? What I saw from your presentation is that you, for the explanation of different aspects of the philosophy, you use linguistics, right? So, but you also mentioned that you use, for example, I don't know if it was an ethnographic approach, because you said that they let you in and they taught you the language. What kind of methods and methodologies did you use, for example, to overcome the story selling?
So coming to your question, thank you for both of your questions. About the political situation, if anyone who is following the Indian political situation now, there are contradictory messages from the government. One, for example, celebrating indigenous languages or mother tongues, as they say. There's a strong push towards celebrating linguistic diversity. At the same time, there is a huge move to take over tribal lands all over the country. And the rhetoric that is being pushed now is, if you do not sell your land, how will you develop? How will you get jobs? So it is not done through overt violence many times, but through story selling. So this is what happens there. So Arunachal Pradesh is no exception. So the land protection and their people's attachment to land is slowly getting diluted because of this rhetoric and then story selling processes. How do we prevent story selling? and what methodology did we use. I am a linguist, so when I entered the community, I was not familiar. I did not enter as a linguist or an anthropologist. So it evolved organically with the community. So once I started learning the language, and they started teaching me the language and the cultural nuances. That's how about 25 years ago the work developed, and it has been developing ever since. So later on, I approached culture primarily as a linguist, and of course realizing that anthropological insights are very important in this work. I have developed two sort of, I don't say theories, but approaches. One is one I call RIME, R-I-M-E, respectful intervention for mutual enrichment. So there is no hierarchy there, and we enrich each other. A researcher intervenes in the community. So I do not believe in not intervening or not contacting at all, but when we contact or we intervene in a community, this is the model I follow. Secondly, a language celebration. So it has been noted that when we talk to people in endangered language communities about the death of the language, everybody is concerned and everybody is sad. But often it doesn't help to revive the language, because, oh, if our language is dying, if there is no hope, what's the use of trying? So focusing on death and gloom, it's also been called gloom and doom linguistics or zombie linguistics. It doesn't really help. So we have adopted a model of language celebration. I'm developing this method with the community. It's been quite successful. So if that answers you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Vijay. I was told we need to finish sharp at 6:30, and I think it's 6:31 or 6:32. But I invite all of you to continue the conversation over a drink in the corridor and at the reception, and continue this conversation with Vijay. So thank you very much, Vijay, for this very illuminating and moving lecture. Thank you.
Thank you.